There we go. All right. So starting off, submitted by Marilyn Mendel. Kind of globby probably for you guys, but I think once we zoom in, you'll kind of get an idea what this is. You've watched, if you've seen this, some of these table IDs, you might be starting to get used to this one. And if you look at the tips of these little coral mushrooms, you might give it away. It's also growing on wood. And so this is pretty much the only coral you'll be finding growing directly from wood, unless the mycelium just happens to be growing through it. But this one is always growing on wood. They call this one the crown-tipped coral, Artemisia pyxidatus. It isn't edible, but apparently when it starts going brown like this, it gets a little bit bitter. I have not tried this one, but usually when I find it, it looks kind of like this, and you usually get it about that big. So, all right, Daniel Berman submitted this guy. Over time, you start kind of learning what kind of a mushroom looks like, what to kind of zoom into genus just by looking at the cap. So this one's kind of has a matte cap, kind of dark colors, little reddish brown. If I'd see something in the woods like that, I'd look at that and go, that looks like a bolete. So turn it over, you see it's got pores. The pores are starting to go kind of like a pinkish hue. There is a specific genus that has that color spore. So you go, okay, well, this is Tylopolis once you learn that. Another thing that you can look for with boletes is like checking the stipe or the stem area here. And sometimes there's some sort of ornamentation. There's a few types of, general sections of boletes. They've got some of the regular boletes have something called reticulation, which is kind of like a web pattern on the stipe. There is a Tylopolis that looks very similar to this, and it usually has some pretty dark brown reticulation on the stipe. And that's one of the very bitter boletes. That's Tylopolis phelleus. Don't see that one on this. Now, this is all the information that we have. There are quite a number of boletes that look like, so sometimes tasting them can be very beneficial. And by tasting, I mean taking a little nibble, chewing it up and spitting it out just to see how that goes. So I don't know what it tastes like. So I kind of had to make a guess. Also, when it comes to boletes, knowing the substrate or their mycorrhizal partners can be very helpful. So this is a Tylopolis species. It may be Rubra. That's one that is bitter, looks kind of like this. It doesn't have the reticulation because we don't see that web pattern on here. So that might be what it is. There's some others that aren't bitter. So it might have been those, but we can't tell. Anyway, let me move on from that. We actually found quite a few of these at Sequinota. Daniel submitted this one as well. You can see he's kind of broken it apart. You can see that thick tube layer. Sometimes the tube layer thickness can actually be beneficial. Now, I was telling you about the different types of boletes. This guy does have some ornamentation on the stipe, and this one has kind of like little fibrils on it, and they're getting a bit dark. And so they call those scabers. So this is one of the scaber stalks. If you've got a scaber stalk, it could be in Lixinum. I'm sure there's other ones that genus that will fit, but in general, it would be considered a Lixinum. This one's kind of pale colored, and I learned something over the weekend. Apparently, this one can be quite gray on the top and quite gray on the stipe, even though I think of it more of a very kind of almost whitish pale one. So this is probably Lixinum albellum, but the host trees would need to be known. Don't know what that is. So if there were birch around, it might be Holopus. All right, we got another bolete. Jesse Dubin sent this in out from the Catoctin Mountains. This is a pretty stately bolete. Looking a little bit more colorful. Flipping it over. This isn't reticulation, I don't believe, and it's not scabers. This is just a coloration. One thing to note in boletes oftentimes is the color of the pore layer. Many boletes that you find will have a yellow pore layer. This one looks like it might be yellow, but if you look closer in, what's happened is it's probably starting to fade on the edges. And so when you look in this picture, you can see, oh, that looks more orange or red. And so, oh, okay, so this is one of the red or orange pored boletes. So that'll definitely help narrow down what you're looking for. It looks like the flesh is black in this, but this is actually, over time, the staining has gotten darker and darker. So this is a deeply blue staining, which you can also see with this little X mark that that they've put on it. So what was it? Oh, so the red or orange pores. So there are some general rules if you're thinking about eating boletes. One of them is if it has a red or orange pore layer, don't eat it. Could upset your stomach. Another thing with blue staining, if it stains blue, don't eat it. That might rule out some good ones, but you'd rather stay safe than sorry. So I am not the best with boletes, but I think this may be Boletus subvolutipes. But sometimes when you go to these forays, you start realizing that you might be lumping some of these things into a different group, and plus we don't know really what it was growing with. So but anyway, I believe that's what that is. All right, this was submitted by Daniel as well. This is a pretty common bolete in our area. And also you'll notice the boletes, they are the mushrooms that tend to have pore layers that are terrestrial and grown from the ground, and usually not from, not from wood. This one's a fun find, even though it's kind of small. It tends to be quite orange brown. They call this the chestnut bolete. One thing that he didn't do with this, which I like to do, is the genus that this mushroom's in always has some sort of hollowed out stipe. It might have little chambers in it, but they're always hollowed out. So this used to be Gyroporus castaneus, and I just found out they changed it to smithii. So now Gyroporus castaneus is Gyroporus smithii, but still the same mushroom. It's actually a pretty tasty edible, but they're so small, it kind of gotta find quite a few or dry them after you find them. Put them in a jar and save them until you get enough. Oh, this was a cool one. So David Lee found this guy. I really like these kinds of Lactarius. I don't know them very well, but I know a few of them. And he had thought this might be Lactarius deliciosus. And if you know the deliciosus group, they tend to stain greenish color, but they tend to be orange. And so they'll be orange. The gills are typically orange, and they will eventually stain to this greenish coloration. But you can see these are not orange. These are more like a pink. They're beautiful mushrooms. And I mean, look at those gills. That's that reddish color. It's fantastic. And they also have another feature I'm going to mention in a minute. But I think this may be Lactarius subpurpureus. I'm not the best at Lactarius, but I think that's what they are. There are some really cool ones. There's like a Chelidonium in this, and I'm calling it a group, but it may not necessarily be a group, but it does have lots of interesting colors. There's Lactarius paradoxus, and that one's more of a blue cap, almost gills a little bit lighter than this, but it also has some crazy staining and like red latex, and they're so beautiful. But one thing I love finding on Lactarius, and I may be geeking out like a mushroom nerd, but the scrobiculation. I love it. They call them potholes now, but it's like these little pits in the stipe. Not all Lactarius have them. And I was kind of like looking at descriptions, and I noticed that Chelidonium and Paradoxus don't have the scrobiculation. So that actually is kind of confirmation, like, oh, okay, and this species does. So if you do find a Lactarius, check out its stipe and see if it has some of these cool little pits in them. And these were nice and colored darkly, so they really stand out. All right, Marilyn sent this in. We actually had this one the last time I did the table ID. This one looks a little paler. I don't know if it's the picture or just the mushroom, because they can fluctuate in color a bit. You can see she's cut it and it's exuding some latex there. That's white. This one is supposed to have scribiculation, or the pits, or as they call them, potholes. I don't really see them in this. This is a very common mushroom. Sometimes it can grow in abundance and just be tons of it all over the place. But this is Lactarius samicola. All right, Don Robinson sent this from Alexandria, and he has some shiitake logs growing. And he was like, hey, I've got an interloper. So he sent me the picture like, hey, what's going on here? And he got that mushroom off, which I think it's kind of a pretty cool little mushroom here. You notice on the underside, it would have free gills. There's kind of a pinkish hue happening on the gills. That's the spores maturing. And most distinctively here are these, these striations that go all the way up to the top. So the pinkish spores growing on wood. These don't necessarily look the freest gills, but they should be free gills. That hones you into a pluteus, and with those striations, it must be Pluteus longistriatus. All right, Georgie sent this in. She said, or they said they went somewhere on vacation and came back, and this is what their house looked like. And they were like, "Oh my gosh, what's happening?" They were loving it, but it's really fun finding mushrooms like this. And here, I'll switch on over so you'll see a couple more pictures. And so you can see there's a stump right here. And, this tree would have had roots spreading out. Actually, that looks like another dead tree, and that one might be growing them as well. One year I was driving through the Greenbelt neighborhood, going to get a bite from work or something. And these were everywhere. Like all the way, once I got into Greenbelt neighborhood, all the way to the restaurant I was going to, they were in everybody's yard, growing everywhere, all over. Anyway, it was kind of crazy how many there were all over this place. Now, you can see they're kind of growing in little clusters. So they would call that a cespitose growth stature. Unfortunately, they didn't get a shot of the underside, but the way that they're growing, the way that they look, you can see we're getting some in situ spore deposits, which are white. This is most likely the Armillaria tibescens, which are the ringless honey mushrooms. Anyway, it's kind of fun to find nice flushes of mushrooms like that. All right, so Jennifer Falk sent this in. Looks like she found a couple here. I believe we've had this one in the past. Actually, no, I think last time we had a different species of cauliflower mushroom. So you can see why they would call it a cauliflower mushroom. And the difference between this one and the other one, well, this one kind of has zonations in the lobes. The other one looked more like egg noodles. And these are a little bit flatter. So I was calling this Spiraceus spathulata, which is one of the cauliflower mushrooms. They're both edible and good. All right, Marilyn found this guy. It kind of looks like not too exciting of a mushroom when you see it on the top, but once you see the underside, it's fantastic. It's got this fuzzy brown, dark brown foot here, stands out, and once you see this one, you're always going to, okay, I've seen that before. It's so striking. So these used to be in Paxillus. They've moved it to Tapenella. This is Tapenella atritomentosa. They called it the velvet foot pax because it used to be in Paxillus. I'm pretty sure these are toxic too, even though they are beautiful. All right. John Klonowski sent this one in from Greenbelt Park. It sure looks like witch's butter to me. But looking close, I'm not used to seeing witch's butter like stand out like that. I also am not certain of the tree type. Like that looks like a hardwood to me. So you'll see the theme here of trying to figure out what wood it's growing on, what tree it's associating with. So sometimes you need to know a little bit more knowledge about what's in your environment than just, oh, that mushroom is this. So it does look like a hardwood to me. So I believe this is a tremella. I threw on Tremella aurantia, which is a witch's butter. Mesenterica is another one, and apparently they're actually not decomposing the wood. They're actually growing on another fungi that is eating the wood. So I believe this one's going for Sterium, and the other is a Piniophora, which is like a crust fungi that grows on the wood. So anyway, I'm not certain of this. Dacryspinax is one that grows on conifers, and I was trying to look up pictures, and this looked like it had a bit of a more Dacryspinax look to it in some of the pictures, but that looks like hardwood, and Dacryspinax is always on conifer. So I'm not certain, but I think it's a witch's butt. Okay, Roberta found these guys. They're a little washed out in this picture, but you can see. Zooming in, unfortunately, she didn't get the base. If you do find, I guess I should say, looking at this, actually, you can kind of see there is a little sack right here. When you're hunting mushrooms, it's good to try, and like I was saying, recognizing mushrooms, trying to like maybe see, oh, that might be this genus or that might be this genus. Something with a little vulva sac and a ring on it, that might be an Amanita. They kind of have a look too, and often have striations in the margin. This one doesn't really have striations in the margin, but getting the base can be very helpful when you're trying to ID Amanitas. This one doesn't look like it has a ring, but it looks like a slug got to it, so it hadn't had a chance to really drop off there. And it looks like it's still maybe a little young and hasn't opened up yet. So this would have had a partial veil, which would have been covering the gills and protecting them. All white, would have white spore print. This is in the group of the most deadly mushrooms. This is the Phalloidae group, where most of your most deadly mushrooms are. So this is a good one to look at and remember and go, oh yeah, okay, those all white ring, top, bottom, spores, all that stuff. Every now and then they'll have some color on the top. True Phalloides has almost a greenish hue to the top, but we don't really have that in our area so far. Or at least not much. Anyway, I put on Amanita amaravarosa, Destroying Angel. Something else I learned this weekend, I didn't realize Bisporigera is usually a pretty small mushroom. So I was calling a lot of stuff Bisporigera, and apparently they're not that big, and this looks like a pretty hefty looking mushroom. So good one to know. Roberta sent this in. I'm zoomed in pretty close. I think this might be a pine needle. I don't know. So this is another one of those ones where you're like, okay, well, what's that growing on? They look so similar, you don't know. So they call these the troop mushrooms. And sometimes when you find these, they can be completely covering the stump or the wood or whatever, where they're growing on. I mean, I've seen a stump with these, and you could hardly, it was all mossy and you could hardly see underneath it. There was just so many. It was beautiful. They have decurrent gills. They have a bit of cross veining. They're little bitty guys. It's usually kind of like yellow up the top and goes darker towards the base. But you need to know which they're growing on. Because I thought it was a conifer, I put on Xeromphalina campanella. I may be wrong. Kaufmannii is one that looks just like it. That grows on hardwoods. So it could have been that. But anyway, they look very similar. They're fun to find, especially when they're growing in abundance. All right. Maria found this guy. This one's awesome. So it's not necessarily red. There's some little red cups that you can find in the woods. They're like the Sarcoscyphus, but they are not fuzzy like this. This one just stands out in how fuzzy it is. It's an ascomycete, which, The basidios are the ones that more like gills and pores and things like that, and their spores are produced on little clubs. The ascos, which the morels are included, have the two little tubes with the spores in it, and they mature and squirt out the top. But anyway, this one sometimes can have a bit more of a stipe going on it. But this furry, which floccos would be a term, that they would use. So this is Microstoma floccosum, which makes sense. But anyway, I don't know that I've ever seen that out and about, so I thought that was a fun find. Roberta Gartside found these beautiful fibrils, scales all over the cap of this guy. When you see some more mature ones, you see, okay, well, they are basically kind of disappearing. They would call this deliquescing, and they're turning black. So this is one of the inky caps, and this is the scaly inky cap. It's growing from wood. This used to be, I think, Quadrifida, and they have changed it. It's now Coprinopsis variegata. They call that one the scaly inky cap. And last but not least, this guy. Look at that cap. That's amazing. I probably should have zoomed in and had one. So there is a bolete that I know of. It's a bolete. It's got the pores. And you'll see, okay, I had just mentioned looking at the ornamentation on site. This one's got some scabers on it, so that should put it in Lixinum. The Lixinum I know with that super wrinkly cap typically has a much stouter stipe and not as thickly covered in scabers like that. It's Lixinum, or actually they changed, what is it, Hemilixinum hortonii. But anyway, I kind of did a little Google search and was trying to look some stuff up, and it may be Lexinellum quercophyllum, but I am not certain on that. But it's still a fun find. When you do find hortonii, it almost always has this deeply pitted cap. It's really a fun one to find. But like I said, it's usually a stouter stock. Last but not least, I'm using the pick Elizabeth got from INAT, just so you can see all these different finds. Go on iNaturalist, you can scroll through there and see a lot of what we found. Thanks for all the submissions, and if I missed you, sorry. Maybe I'll fit you in next time I do it. But anyway, thanks.